Hey, this is Mike Robbins. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. Hope you're doing well, you, your family, your team, everyone around you. I want to talk today about two kind of simple but definitely important and challenging aspects of life, of leadership, of parenting, of relationships, of so many important aspects of life. And that is apologizing and forgiving. These are two things that I know a little bit about, although at times, admittedly, I can find challenging. Maybe you can relate to that as well. And, a few weeks ago, I was on the road. I was actually at an event in Orlando, Florida for the National Speakers Association. And I've been involved with NSA for many years. I was really involved in the early days of my speaking career. I started my business back in 2001. And for probably about 10, 12 years, I went to a lot of events here locally in the Bay Area, but also around the country. And it's a group of other professional speakers, and we do a lot of networking and education and supporting of one another. And I stopped actively participating, I don't know, probably 10, 12 years ago because, my life got busy, business was going well. I was speaking and traveling a decent amount. And with the age of our girls and the nature of our life, it just sort of felt like I needed to try to do everything that I could to limit how much I was traveling. And anyway, in the course of being at this event, I was doing some reflecting. It's nice to reconnect with some old friends and meet some new friends. And I just started thinking about the last, you know, 2.5 decades of my life. And as I was thinking about Michelle and I, raising our girls, Samantha's now 19 and Rosie's 16. And I called Michelle and I actually left her a message. And I just said, "Hey, babe, listen, I know for many years when the girls were young, one of the biggest points of contention in our marriage and in our family was me traveling. Um, and I did everything that I could to try to limit as much travel as possible. I was fortunate and still am fortunate to have a lot of, local clients in the Bay Area where we live and try to do as many events as I could close to home. Or, I took a lot of flights like right after I got done speaking to get back as soon as I could, or left early in the morning, or, did a lot of things to try to minimize the amount of time that I was away. But I noticed that for a lot of years, I would often get very defensive when the issue would come up about me traveling. And I think that's because I had a hard time fully acknowledging the impact on you and how challenging it was for you at home with the girls, with me not there. And while I did everything I could not to miss too many things and not to be away too much, I can see now from a different perspective that that was challenging. And I'm sorry about that. And I'm also sorry that I had a hard time acknowledging that back in those days. And, Michelle got my message and she called me back and she left me a message back. We were, you know, away from each other. So we were kind of ships passing in the night in terms of communicating, but she left a message back and just said, "Thank you so much for the apology." And, in turn, she said, I realize now looking back on that too, like you were in a really hard spot trying to do your work and inspire people and, provide for our family. And then also knowing how hard it was on me back home and the girls and us missing you and you missing out on certain things. So it was challenging. And she's like, I probably could have handled that better as well. So it turned into a double apology. I mean, I wasn't saying that to her so that she would apologize back. But as I reflected on it more and was thinking about like, why was it hard for me back in those days, or even now in the present moment, why is it sometimes hard for me to acknowledge certain things or apologize? And I think in that specific instance, just as I used that example to illustrate the point, um, I think for me it was hard, again, to fully acknowledge some of the impact that my work was having on my wife and our girls. Again, even though I was aware of it to some degree, it's like I felt the need to defend myself. But it could be worse. But I could be away more. But I'm doing everything that I can to be around. And so, and again, multiple things can be true at the same time. And that's one of the many complexities, I think, when it comes to apologizing. Just because we apologize for something or we can acknowledge an impact that we've had on someone else or that something didn't go well, it could also be true that we had every good intention of it not being that way. There's a difference between intent and impact, right? Sometimes I have the most positive intention that I could think of, and I still do or say something that has a negative impact on another human or a group of humans. For those of us who happen to be parents and leaders and teachers and interacting with more than just one person at a time. So let's talk a little bit about apologizing before we get to forgiving, because they're both related, but they can be tricky for a bunch of reasons. What makes it hard for us to apologize to other human beings, to our spouse, our children, our parents, our friends, our family members, our coworkers, our employees? What makes that hard? Well, I think there is that disconnect sometimes between intention and impact, right? We have good intentions, we try our best, we do our best, and then sometimes things don't work out. And so sometimes I think when we apologize, we feel like we're admitting defeat or somehow acknowledging, we did something wrong or bad or nefarious or whatever, even if it's like, I didn't mean for that to happen, but it still happens. We've all had apologies used against us. Look, when I was growing up, at times in my family and with some people close to me, I can remember with really good intention apologizing, trying to atone for something and say that I was sorry and try to make amends and make it better. And instead of that being received with thank you for the apology, or maybe there being a reciprocation, a sort of double apology, if that was appropriate, it would get met with, yeah, you did screw up, or yeah, that was wrong, or why did you do that, or sort of doubling or tripling down on it. And at that point, it sort of felt like, wait, now my vulnerability, my earnest intention to try to make things better is now somehow being used against me or weaponized back against me. And not always with malicious intent, but that can sometimes make it harder and even scarier for us to apologize. Sometimes in our relationships, in our with our significant other, in our, business partner relationships, sibling relationships, friend relationships, close relationships, peers at work, sometimes consciously or unconsciously, we're doing that kind of power dynamic thing, right? Like who's in charge or who has the upper hand, and sort of apologizing can seem like it puts us at a disadvantage, right? Especially when it's used against us. We live in this world today, politically, socially, culturally, otherwise, where it's like a lot of self-righteousness, a lot of gotcha, a lot of I'm right, you're wrong, I'm going to prove that. And again, stepping into apologizing is quite a vulnerable and courageous thing to do, but doesn't always work out, if you will, doesn't always make us look good or feel good. It doesn't feel good a lot of times to apologize unless it's received exactly the way that we want it to be received, which it often isn't. Um, and again, when we look at life or think of things in this binary way, like there's a right and there's a wrong, there's a good and there's a bad, which most situations in life are not quite that cut and dried. But sometimes the apology can seem as though, we're admitting that we were wrong completely and the other person was right. And look, I definitely can be as self-righteous as the next person, and I like to be right. I like to win arguments. But the truth is, more than anything, I want to be seen. I want to be heard. I want to be acknowledged, both for intention and be responsible for my impact. But it's a tricky thing emotionally, I think, at times, because again, it takes a lot of trust, ironically, in order to be able to apologize to another human being or really own up to mistakes that we've made or things that we tried that didn't work out. It's easy to get frustrated. We live in a world full of blame. I was just talking to someone. I've been working with this nutritionist and trying to make some adjustments with my diet and my exercise and some things that I'm doing for a bunch of reasons. But, I noticed that I haven't been having the results that I wanted. And in my communication back and forth with her, I was getting frustrated. Like I was trying not to blame her or blame the process or the protocol, but I think it was like, again, hard for me to acknowledge maybe I'm not following this effectively, or maybe this isn't an effective approach for me because it doesn't seem to be working. So instead of us going to that deeper level of vulnerability or of ownership of what's really going on, sort of down below the waterline on the iceberg, so to speak, it's much easier to just point a finger and blame or judge or complain about something. So that's some of the many things that make apologizing difficult or challenging. But what becomes available when we do apologize? And remember, apologizing is simply just acknowledging something that we've done or that we've said that we either regret or based on the feedback of others, we realize didn't have the intended outcome that we wanted. It's not saying I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm terrible, I screwed up, I'm right. I mean, like there are times in life when we do completely screw up. But I think if we're coming at apologizing from this shame-based place, like I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm flawed, I'm not good enough, then no matter what we say or do, isn't really going to get resolved. We're trying to get the other person to do something for us that they can't do. Right? Does that make sense? If I'm asking you, tell me I'm not bad, tell me I'm not wrong, tell me you don't hate me. Now, again, I might vulnerably be scared you're going to be really upset with me because this thing happened, because I made this mistake, or I missed this deadline, or I didn't follow through on the thing that I said I was going to, or I tried really hard and it didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to, or you wanted it to, right? But that's a different conversation than like, I'm bad, I'm wrong, please don't hate me, as opposed to, you know what? I either didn't carve out enough time to get this thing done, or I tried a bunch of things that weren't effective, or in hindsight, I realized I don't really know what I'm doing here. This is like, you know, more challenging than I realized, or whatever the case is, right? In the case of the example that I was using earlier with Michelle, realizing, oh, yeah, me being away to the degree that I was when our girls were younger, that did put a lot of pressure and stress and challenge on you. I'm sorry for doing that. And I'm also sorry that I had a hard time acknowledging that and owning that back then because I felt guilty. And I also felt challenged and conflicted. Like, I love my work. I love being out in the world. I need to, at some level, support our family financially. And that's how I was doing it. And me doing that took me away from you and took me away from the girls and put some pressure and challenge on you that was hard for me to just sort of own up to. And again, multiple things can be true at the same time. I could be out in the world doing exactly what I'm meant to do, being fulfilled, making a living for our family, attempting to have a positive impact on other people, all of which was true. And when I was in, Vegas or Scottsdale or Orlando or New York or Texas or London or whatever at a speaking engagement, I was in those moments not home with my wife and with our daughters. And that put a certain amount of pressure and stress and challenge on Michelle that didn't exist in the same way when I was home. And again, while that seems pretty simple and straightforward, especially to talk about now, back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that was a really challenging conversation for Michelle and I to navigate in our marriage for a bunch of reasons, right? But being able to own up and apologize for what we've done or what we haven't done or what we've said or what we haven't said or the impact that we've had, whether we intended it or not on another person or a group of people, I think is important. I see this in leadership all the time. Again, as a leader, it's not like you want to be apologizing 24/7 all the time. Sorry, 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 sorry. And a lot of the over apologizing that we can do in life is trying to compensate for something, but authentically letting the team know, listen, I know I said this. And now here we are 3 months later, and I'm changing course. Maybe it's because market conditions have changed. Maybe it's because we got a new directive from up above. Maybe it's just because what we've been doing hasn't been working. So I apologize that I sent you all in this direction and put a lot of energy and attention and even pressure on you to move in that direction. Now I'm saying we're going to do a 180 and go in a different direction. But when a leader does that and he or she can actually own up to it and say, you know what? I made a mistake in judgment, or I thought based on everything that I knew at the time, this was the right decision. I've actually now realized that wasn't the best decision. I'm making a different decision, and this is what we're doing. I think people can respect and understand that and appreciate it. Or again, we have a moment in a meeting or in an email or on Slack that we get frustrated, we get stressed, we say something, we do something that in hindsight we regret. I think sometimes our tendency is to just like hope nobody noticed or hope it goes away or don't want to make a big deal about it or bring it back up. But what if you could chime back in with the group, either on Slack or email or on Zoom or in person, and just say, hey, you know what? I reflected on my response yesterday to that conversation we were having about the budget or about our goals or about our new direction or the reorg or whatever. I realize now I wish I would have handled that differently. I was stressed, I was annoyed, I was frustrated, I felt like the conversation was spinning or whatever. You know what I mean? Not making a big excuse, but just being able to own up to it. It goes such a long way in terms of our personal credibility. It's not always easy to do. It's not always received in the way we want it to be received. But look in your life right now, both personally and professionally. Where are there some places where you can authentically apologize? You can genuinely atone for things. And again, it doesn't mean you're bad, you're wrong, you screwed up, everyone going to hate you. It means you're a human being, an imperfect human being. Almost all the time, 99.9% of the time, you and I are doing the best we can. And we make mistakes and we have regrets. And we realize whether it's a moment later or an hour later or a day later or a week later or a month later, sometimes a decade later, we look back and go, oh, geez, I wish I would have handled that differently. We can do this with our children, whether they're 3 or 30 or anywhere in between. Hey, you know what? I realize now I wish I would have handled certain things differently when you were younger, or, you know, have an interaction with your teenager. If you have teenagers like me, I'm regretting my interactions with both of our teenage daughters, especially Rosie, who's still here at home, all the time. Oops. I wish I would have said that differently. Oops. I wish I would have responded to that one differently, whether on text or in person, right? So, apologizing is a powerful thing to do. And if you're in a leadership position, whether you're a parent or a manager or a community leader, you modeling the apologizing authentically from a place of strength gives other people permission to do the same. Now, let's talk about forgiveness. So, forgiveness can come in the form when someone does come and apologize to you. But I find like that to me is the easiest way to forgive another human being. It's when they come to me and say, hey, Mike, I'm so sorry that I did this thing or I said this thing, or now I realize I wish I wouldn't have done this thing. It's pretty easy for me to forgive someone. Now, not even if what they did was pretty significant, if there's some level of ownership, if there's some level of really making, genuinely wanting to make amends. But that's not often how it shows up in life, right? Oftentimes we're tasked with forgiving people or forgiving situations. Sometimes when people don't ask for forgiveness or maybe defending themselves and thinking what they did was fine. Now, look, it's tricky. And remember, what makes forgiveness difficult? Number one, we're not trained to do it, just like apologizing. When have you taken a class on apologizing or forgiving? Hardly ever. Maybe you read a book. My friend and mentor, Fred Luskin, wrote a book years ago called Forgive for Good. And he was actually looking at forgiveness from a scientific standpoint, from a medical standpoint. What is it? How do we forgive practically? And then what's the impact on our brain and our nervous system? And he found some incredible stuff that when we forgive, there's so many positive benefits for us. The person forgiving, like holding a grudge, is actually bad for our health. There's that saying, right? Holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So if we're just looking at it from a purely selfish perspective, it's in our best interest to forgive people, not to hold on to grudges. But forgiveness is difficult because, again, we're not trained to do it very well. It's not modeled all that much in our society. We don't see it. It sometimes can be seen as weakness. Someone else wrongs us, someone else hurts us, and we're like, okay, no worry about it, no big deal. We let it go when in reality, wait a minute, that was a big deal. Wait a minute, that was painful. Wait a minute, that didn't work. I didn't like that. I don't want to let people walk all over me. I want to have healthy boundaries. So wait a minute, if I'm forgiving people, am I wishy-washy? Am I not having boundaries? Am I not standing up for myself? Am I not speaking up? Am I not telling the truth? It can start to get murky. But remember, forgiveness doesn't mean we forget what happened. Forgiveness doesn't mean we're saying no big deal or it's okay. Forgiveness means we choose to let go of the resentment about whatever the thing is. And sometimes that takes quite a bit of work. And sometimes that might involve like not wanting to be in relationship with the person anymore, or having some very clear boundaries with that person, or some specific consequences for what was done. But the forgiveness is for us. The forgiveness is to release the resentment, the judgment, the self-righteousness that says that was wrong. Now, it may be wrong for us. It may be something that didn't work for me. I don't want that. Please don't do that. Please don't say that. No, thank you. Again, that's the boundary for us. But forgiveness is powerful because when we forgive, we give as we did before whatever happened. We re-engage in relationships. And even if we choose to disengage from the relationship, it's still in our best interest to forgive the other person or the other people so that we're not suffering, so that we're not holding a grudge, so that we're not constantly on edge or traumatized by the experience. Now, look, I realize there's a wide range of things that happen in life for us to think about forgiving. Some from the most extreme. You think about if you ever read, Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Think about that situation, being in the Holocaust. I can't even imagine what it would be like to even attempt to forgive people causing that much harm and that much destruction, murder and dehumanization at the most intense level. But when we think about our daily lives, the things that are done and said that we feel wronged by, the things we get upset and offended by, the things that irritate us, the things that hurt our feelings, the things that, quite frankly, aren't okay with us, do we have the ability, the capacity to forgive? We do. We've done it many, many, many times in our lives. We do it when something or someone is more important to us than the grudge that we're holding, than the obsession with being right. Being able to forgive is essential if we're going to have a healthy marriage, if we're going to have a healthy family, if we're going to have healthy relationships of any kind, personally or professionally. Being able to forgive each other inside of a company, inside of a business, on a team is necessary. Now, that doesn't mean we let each other off the hook. That doesn't mean we let people be rude and disrespectful and inappropriate. No, no, not at all. It does mean that we don't waste so much time and energy holding grudges against all the people around us, keeping score and inventory on who wronged us and who interrupted us in a meeting and who stole our idea. And, again, I'm not saying these things are cool, but do we have the ability to go talk about those things directly, to have that sweaty palm conversation that I often talk about that's hard to have? But sometimes part of the forgiveness process is having a really challenging but important adult conversation like, hey, that didn't work for me. I didn't like that. Please don't do that to me ever again. Right? That frustrated me, pissed me off, scared me, offended me, whatever, that we have that conversation, not from a place of blame or shame, but from a place of truth. Again, being in relationship with people, working with people, managing people, living with people, raising other humans if we have children, like these are all vulnerable, important, and at times messy things. But our ability to forgive is essential. And one of the biggest reasons why we don't forgive others very effectively or as generously and authentically as we could is because we often don't do a great job forgiving ourselves. We can be super hard on ourselves. We hold grudges against ourselves all the time. But if we can be a bit kinder, a bit gentler, a bit more compassionate, a bit more forgiving with ourselves, it makes it more likely and more possible for us to genuinely do that with other people. One of the practices that I have, and you've heard me talk about this here on the show before, I try to write down 3 things every day that I'm grateful for as a practice first thing in the morning. And I also write down 3 things that I forgive myself for. Because I know that I have a tendency to be really hard on myself. And look, I believe we don't see other people as they are, we see them as we are. So the more forgiving we are towards ourselves, not letting ourselves off the hook, not holding ourselves accountable or being irresponsible, but authentic forgiveness, the more likely we're able to do that for other people. Where are there some people in your life right now that you could forgive? You don't have to, but for yourself, where could you let go of some grudges, some resentment, some self-righteous judgments that you have of other people? You're entitled to all your opinions. I'm not saying water down your opinions. I'm not saying don't have your values and beliefs. But what I am saying is it's probably not serving you to hold that grudge. It's not helping that relationship if you're still in relationship with that person. And even if you're not, what's the point of holding on to that resentment? You've already made sure that person is no longer in your life, or they've made sure of that, or some combination of the two things. But what's the point of holding on to the grudge and the resentment? The forgiveness, again, is to liberate you. But whether we're talking about leadership or parenting or just life in general in relationship, all of us can benefit from a little, if not a lot more of forgiveness. So apologizing and forgiving, two simple ideas, two challenging things for us to really engage in authentically as human beings, but two of the most important things that we can do to free ourselves up, to be the kind of leaders, the kind of parents, the kind of spouses, the kind of friends, the kind of humans that we really want to be. So, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. As always, I appreciate it. Make sure to hit the follow or the subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. And there's links in the show notes as well as in the description here on YouTube where you can learn more about me and my work. Best place to do that is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com. Until next time, keep bringing your whole self to work and life. And remember, we're all in this thing together.